Welcome to HoppiTV. I'm Hoppi Wimbush, founder of the Lammas Earth Centre for Transformation and Healing and founding member of the Lammas Eco-Village. And I'm delighted that you're joining me for this interview series, conversation series of people living with purpose. And I have with me today Bruce Parry. Now, Bruce, what an amazing human being. I'm so blessed to have you here. I just want to share a little bit about your life so far and what you've accomplished and what you've explored and what you've dedicated your life to. So Bruce has been working with the BBC and produced many different award-winning series. So Tribe, Amazon, Arctic, Blizzard. You even made a Cannibals and Crampons series. Yeah.
My first one.
Amazing series that really explored some of the remotest tribes on Earth. And I know you're not that bothered about the accolades and the awards that you've won, but you've won BAFTAs and the RTS Award for Presenter of the Year, all sorts of amazing confirmations of your contribution. So I want to know a little bit more about you.
Let's do it.
Fantastic. So the first question that comes up for me is, what were you like as a child? Did you go and explore ants' nests and climb trees?
Yeah, you know what, Hoppi? Yeah, I did. I was very lucky that we always lived in the countryside. We moved around a lot, so I can't say I was very rooted as a kid, but my parents made a conscious decision to always be living in the countryside. And so, yeah, I spent most of my childhood shooting rabbits and pigeons, crawling around, getting up at 5 in the morning before the sun was up, and then crawling through the dew to find a spot to see what was going on. And that was my first little adventures, really. They were my first little adventures. And yeah, so very outdoorsy life. And then when I went to school, I went to boarding school, and my best friend at school was his name was Ed Swales. His father, Wandy, who's sadly no longer with us, was a great influence in my life. And he used to lead these expeditions back in the day out to Indonesia in particular. And so Ed used to come back from his holidays with all these like new traps and sort of techniques for making fire without rubbing sticks and like without making smoke. And so through Ed being with his dad, I was then sort of vicariously absorbing all this sort of stuff. So it really was just sort of boy's own, making shelters, climbing trees, running around. It was very
natural play, natural childhood, engaged with our beautiful nature. And so that inspiration of having contact with other cultures, but you hadn't actually been there yet. Where was the crossover when you actually started to go exploring? Because you are one of the most prolific explorers alive today, or you have been, most definitely.
Well, it's so funny because I don't see that in myself, but maybe, that sounds very sweet of you to say. The first sort of proper trip I did abroad was almost the complete opposite to what the type of trip that I do now. I was in the Marines and we went to Iraq and Kurdistan, and that was my first sort of real connection with another group, which was nothing at all to do with connecting them. It was about ordering them around and telling them what we were getting. It was like a totally different experience.
What were you when you were
I was an officer in the Marines, a lieutenant, and so that was a job where we were doing the first sort of bit of a relief work after the first war when Saddam was sort of gassing them in the Kurds. And so we went out there to try and push him south and then help them out going back to their lands. And so that was my first sort of interaction with another group of people in that way. And of course, but it was in a uniform, almost down the barrel of a gun kind of thing. So that was not like the rest of my time.
That's full on.
Yeah, it was interesting. And we could spend the next hour just talking about that if you wanted to, but
probably not.
Probably not.
I'm more.
No, my reflection. Yeah, my reflection of that from this perspective now is interesting, of course.
Well,
but let's not go there because we've got other things to talk about.
Well, I don't know. Let's not divert so quickly.
No.
So just a little bit. What did that experience teach you about human nature, about
Well, I was just
relationship
so
with Earth?
wrapped up in my perspective of that time, which was just about being a Marine.
Yeah.
And so we were looking at those people who we were trying to help through the prism of whether or not they fitted into what we wanted to do, because we had orders, and like we were trying to help them, but it's like, turn up on this day and then we'll bring you to your village, but they wouldn't turn up, and so we would get frustrated with them because they have a different sense of time. And so all of this is very typical sort of, I guess, colonial view of like trying to see another group through the prism of your own eyes, rather than trying to understand what's going on for them. We had our own routine.
And you had your own remit and your own agenda.
Absolutely. And also we were part of a very high command structure, which obviously there wasn't any room for flexibility in my humanity to be able to go, well, actually, he's got a problem today. No, we've got deadlines and agendas. Let's get on with it. So that was a very different way of engaging with the different population. Even though, of course, the what we were trying to do was a positive thing. Through a certain prism, you know, we're trying to help them out. Yeah. But it was interesting when I reflect back on that, how different that is to obviously how I've worked to the directions I moved in afterwards.
Totally stark contrast. You know, going from time agendas, you know, imposing with the will to do good, to help with the Saddam craziness that went on there, and then going from that into working for the BBC and exploring.
Yeah, well, no, but I mean, my journey into that space as well took a long time. So on leaving the Marines, I went off and did an expedition with my friend's father. I finally went away with him to Indonesia. And then I went, and basically, I mean, I had a little stint at university, but I didn't last long. And I pretty much straight away got into leading expeditions out in Asia. So science and conservation trips in Borneo, in Sumatra, Sulawesi, Ambon, New Guinea, you know, all of the islands there, working with turtles, orangutan, rhino, all these extraordinary tiger. So working with scientists, studying these wonderful biodiversity areas, all these animals in these remote parts of these islands of Indonesia.
And what was your role
I was
there?
leading.
You were leading
I was
the
leading
expedition,
those
so you
trips.
were holding the people, making sure they were safe.
Absolutely, yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So this is the days before sat phones or anything.
Wow.
So this was like literally 3 or 4 days up a river in the middle of Borneo with 2 doctors, 2 nurses, and me being the leader. Then I would have an assistant and a translator and a couple of jungle guides and a carpenter or 2. And then with 20 kids or 20 people, young people often. And then off we would go. And so that was my gig for like 4 or 5 years, and it was the best job I ever did, much better than any TV stuff. It was amazing, I loved it.
How can you assess a landscape that you're essentially an alien into and assess it for danger for other people? Like, how can you do that? Like, how do you do that?
My role as leader was to listen to the advice of all of the different specialists I had around me. So medical issue, I had doctors. I had jungle issue, I had jungle experts. Or building project, we had carpenters. So I was just the fulcrum who was or the center point who listened to them and then make the final decision, having all of the information from all the different sources.
Amazing.
And so that was my role, was just someone who could hold it. And I did that for years and absolutely loved it, like 15 odd expeditions out in the really remote, amazing places, working with scientists who were so excited about water mites or tigers or whatever, and like sort of vibing from their energy of how excited they got. And then with this extraordinary group of people who would then go and build them a lab or a hide or a feeding platform or something.
So for me, what comes up is like you're connecting with people that have awe and wonder for their work. You know, people that are absolutely ignited with a passion for nature, for creation, for the beauty of the natural world, and guiding people in safety through that. So how did you go from that to drinking blood?
Well, you know, in that, mostly we were working with scientists, but occasionally we were in areas where there were indigenous peoples nearby. And so we definitely had crossover, but it was still very much that I was more in charge of looking after the group and stuff, and then maybe we'd go on our trek through a longhouse in Borneo and meet the Dayaks or whatever. So I was having these relationships, but I didn't have any anthropological knowledge or any real understanding. It was just trying to work my way through it, really.
You were just being your gorgeous self and just being so open and warm.
Yes, but I wasn't long out of the Marines back then, and so it was a gorgeous self, thank you very much. I think I was beneath it all, but there was definitely other layers on top of me that were more complex. But so I did that for a few years, and then I quit for reasons I don't need to go into here, but I kind of ethical. I just felt it wasn't going the right way for me. Yes. And I believed very much in what we were doing. It was so hard to leave that job because I loved it so much. But I felt there wasn't really going the right way. So I quit that and then got into the film industry, did that for a few years and made loads of money, but it just wasn't a feel-good thing. I was a location manager in film. And when I was working in expeditions, everyone's like, well, thank you, because we were building things for various people. It was a really beautiful, there was no money in it, but it was a beautiful exchange. Yeah. And then when I was in film, it's like you're just apologizing to people all the time for like trashing their houses or their law as a location manager.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? Okay. I was the interface of that bubble of energy in the outside world. And so it was good cash and really exciting, but not feel good. Yes. On a deeper level. So I kind of didn't last long there. I quit.
It's a different impact, isn't it? It's kind of like you're having an impact on people in an imposing or invasive
No, there's a money
way.
Exchange, but it was the money made up for the fact that we were trashing their place very often.
Well, I know from my experience of film crews coming here, I know what an energy imposition it is. I mean, I'm always open to it. I'm always welcome, and always there is even when there's cash exchange, which isn't that often, but when there is, there's still an impact. Whereas when you're working as a team with a flow, with a common agenda of awe, wonder, of study, of coming to understand and know and have an empathy for different species, that's a completely different remit.
Yeah, totally.
So you went from?
So I did that so I did film, and then Millennium came up, and I thought, well, I want to go and do something special. I want to escape the sort of like the madness of what was happening in Millennium, and I thought, well, why don't I go and do this expedition that I'd always had up my sleeve, which was in New Guinea. There's this mountain that I'd spotted on a map, this sort of snow-capped peak right on the equator. And I couldn't find anyone that had ever climbed it. I was like, and it was right in this area that people aren't supposed to go to. So I thought that would be an amazing adventure. And because I'd spent a lot of time in Indonesia, I'd always heard of New Guinea, but never quite managed to make it there. And so that was always something that I was going to do one day. And then Millennium came along, and I was like, well, that would be an amazing thing to do why don't I go to a place where they don't even understand Millennium? They're still using stone tools, and go there for our sort of crazy millennium, 2,000 years since a certain date in the diary that makes no sense to these people. So why don't I go
to a timeless place?
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
A place that's got such a pinnacle of time for
and
the
I
Western
wanted
world.
to go and have an adventure. So I did, and basically because I'd been in film and I was living with my dear friend Adam, he said to me, why don't you film it? You'd be great. And because he was already working in the film industry too, and he was doing much better than me. He'd gone up the ladder a lot, and so he goes, look, if you want, I can introduce you to a TV company and write a pitch, and so I did that. Ginger TV. I wrote a pitch, spent a couple of days doing it, photocopied some pictures, wrote a load of blurb. I had no idea what a pitch was, but I sort of figured it out and handed it to them. They were like, "This is amazing. How much do you want? We really want to back it." Wow. So I got a load of cash, took a friend, Mark Anstis, and off we went to New Guinea. And Mark and I had, without doubt, the best time of our lives. I still say that it's the best trip I've ever done, and I think Mark, up until recently, Mark was always saying it was. I don't know if he's done anything more recent, but for both of us, it was the most amazing adventure.
And why? What?
Because because ultimately back then it was a boys' own adventure. We went on We genuinely thought there was a good chance we weren't going to come back. Wow. We genuinely thought we have no idea what we're going to. Wow. We all of our kit, we were having grappling hooks made up and stuff for crossing rivers because we just knew there were no bridges. Wow. We knew that we were going into the unknown. We knew that there were big blanks on the map, that places that people supposedly didn't know about. We couldn't find the research. And then we discovered that people had climbed the mountain that we were going to climb, but from the north up this really gentle slope, and we were
going on the high.
We were going from the south when we didn't know anywhere, we couldn't find any information about these places, and then going up this very incredible steep sort of cliffs, and so we were, and even just to get there took us 2 months.
Good
just to
God.
get to the base of the mountain before we could even climb it. So, and we just had the most amazing adventure, and we filmed each other, and we both got into the filming. That was beautiful, because I know, nowadays lots of expeditions take cameras with them, and for many people who are the purists of the expedition world, the camera's a bit of a hassle, because they'd much rather be climbing and stuff. But for us, we both enjoyed the creative aspect of making the film too. But it meant that it took 3 times as long. You have to cut, because we canoed for the first 2 or 3 weeks up these massive rivers in these big dugouts, wooden dugouts. So I have to canoe up, and then Mark gets out, or I get out, and we sit on the bank, and then we have to go all the way back down again. So then Mark fills us as we come up, and then past him out of shot, and then you have to come back and pick him up, and then on you go. So like what could have been, what could have just been,
just flowing journey.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. It was stop, start, stop, start. Yeah, absolutely. And but we didn't mind, because we both bought into that. And sure enough, we put enough love into that, even though we were complete novices. I mean, I'd worked in the film industry, but I'd never been behind the camera, like operating the camera. So we had no real idea. But it came back, and the BBC bought it. And then it won loads of awards around the world. It won all these big prestigious sort of mountain film festival awards. And so that basically catapulted me into that realm.
It's such a perfect introduction, isn't it, to a life with purpose, of being able to do something that you love with all your heart, that ignites every fibre of your being, that just brings all of your senses alive, and you get paid for it. Do you know what I mean?
But like so many people, there's a lot of luck there too.
Of course.
There's a lot of luck there too. You look at all the guys, like the Google dudes and stuff, they were there at the beginning of that revolution of technology. And I think and the Microsoft people and all, likewise, Mark and I were there at the first moments when small cameras you could take on an expedition. And so we were able to take solar panels and little charging gear, and so that was the beginning of that period. Yeah. And I have to honor that as part of the luck that we carried, because I had already earned my spurs as an expeditioner. I had the wherewithal to be off to do this trip that was like probably beyond what a novice could do, So that was where I had my spurs. But to be able to film it was a new thing, and so that was like revolutionary. I mean, people obviously had always been filming expeditions, but nothing is quite as hardcore as that. We literally were. I mean, all the best bits we couldn't film because we needed both of us to get across the river. It needed both. We could only really film the things that were like, less hardcore than the stuff that was really happening. But we managed to capture enough of the essence that you're like, oh yeah, those guys had a real trip. And that was what made the film what it was. And it's probably still the best thing I ever did.
What's that one called?
It's called Cannibals and Crampons.
That's Cannibals and Crampons. Did you meet any cannibals?
Actually, you know what? And this is interesting, knowing my work now, is that, we did. And we met, we had what they call a first contact. And now that I've been in this world a long time, and of course working with making the series Tribe and with the BBC, and all the research I did beforehand into understanding the ethics and the right way to go about doing things, I would never now go and do what we did then, which is wander into an area where we knew that there were people that no one had, well, we heard that there were people there, but no one really knew about it, to go and meet them. And ethically, that's a very, very complex thing to do. And now I would never do it, and nor would I advise anyone to do it. But I did that kind of in ignorance. It was a bit of a boy's own adventure. It's like, if we can climb the mountain that no one's climbed, and if we can meet the people that no one's met, well then we're cool. We've done that thing. It's a bit of an ego trip, actually. And everything I've done since then is trying to reverse that, in a sense. Yeah.
And when you did meet the people,
they were terrified of us.
Yeah.
They were terrified of us. We came across them in the treehouse, and we do capture it on film. You've got this extraordinary scenes of them like really scared. And one point, one of them like points an arrow at me, and then we're like, okay, we should get out of here. And then they follow us, and then they come after us, and they're like, please go, go, go.
Wow.
And you know what's interesting is we had no idea what they were saying, but Mark, because Mark and I both then had television careers after that, and Mark did go back to not that exact place, but a part of the world nearby where they understand that language. And then finally we had those words translated.
What were they saying to you?
They're saying to each other, what is that? What are they? Wow. Do you think it's ancestors coming here? Should we? And when they were arguing about whether to shoot and kill us or not.
My goodness.
And then later it was like, then when they came after us, it's like, we don't know what you are, but we want you to go.
Oh, do you know, I'm feeling really moved hearing that, because that's so rare now on this earth.
It's rare, but it's also, I still have to live.
You've had that experience.
No, but I also have to live with what
that.
is the possibility that I caused a negative impact in their world. You know, what did they have to deal with after I left?
Yeah.
You know, that's when we're unthinkingly wandering into places. And it's like, well, you know, what is their culture? What did they have to do to appease the bad spirits that may have come to visit them? What was that? What is that? You know, so we don't actually know. And it could be that was not a positive thing to do at all. And it's not that I live with that as like a you know, sleepless nights. I was what I was, and I had no other way of knowing, but it just goes to show the impact that, you know, sort of that laddie, boyish behaviour of like, let's just get out there. It's like that was overriding any sort of more compassionate understanding and wisdom of what might have been the impact of my life or my travels. And so,
well, one of the things that's really struck me, and I've not seen many of your series Tribe, but the ones that I have seen, I was really touched by your sensitivity to the different cultures. You know, one of the episodes that I saw, it was in Africa, Ethiopia, I think, when you came across a culture where all the surrounding tribes were terrified of these people. I can't remember the names of them now. And they whipped the women.
Oh, the hammer, yeah.
And you went into that tribe with such sensitivity and respect, and ended up becoming really, as you have with all the tribes, become such a dear companion and a dear friend, making real soul connections from what I can see on camera. And to be able to do that, Bruce, is a remarkable skill, actually. To be able to enter a completely different world, a completely different culture, and be accepted, be welcomed in, so that they share really deep aspects
of their
perception.
Thank you.
And what was that? What is that like? You know, to be able, what does it feel like to meet people for the first time, having had your experience at Papua New Guinea with the people that had never met you before, being mindful of how they'd experienced you, and then going on to explore remote tribes and going in with that awareness?
Well, clearly I learned a lot in the period in between where, and when I got the gig for being with the BBC, it's like, well, I'm going to be primetime television now for the nation. I better do my due diligence and my research and my work. And so I dove into that deep about learning the ethics of all these things. And but as far as what you're pointing at really is more the human aspect of like really moving in and being with them.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's so funny, isn't it? It's like, for me, you said it's a real skill. I don't see it as anything other than just being a decent human being going in and just, I think anyone can and should and could do that. I just don't see that as anything special. It's just a desire to. Yeah, okay, there's discomforts. I mean, that's definitely where I earn my money, if you will. It's like I'm lying on a mud floor picking ticks off me all night, getting very little sleep with people snoring and crawling all over me, and you know, and the food is very monotonous and very bland often, and that's it. And meanwhile, the crew are eating spag bol and drinking wine or whatever, and so those moments I'm earning my money. But as far as like being like a decent human being and being friendly and being attentive and being a good guest or a good member of the family, that was just, anyone can do that. You just got to want to.
Yeah.
Just got to want to. You just got to, basically, for me, it was like, you know, we hear in so many spiritual traditions is like just being of service is a form of meditation. It's just like, I'm doting on your every move. Well, you're going to put that there. Okay, can I help?
Yes.
I had nothing else to do other than do that. So I said to them, I used to say to them, as soon as I came in, it's like, okay, because they would always like serve me first and everything in the first day or two. And I'm like, listen, I don't want to be your guest. How am I going to learn about how you guys live if I'm just your guest? You have to treat me. And so I just had this sort of routine I'd make up. It's like, you've got to imagine that I'm like a kid about this old, like a 6-year-old kid basically. And so I'm ready to get stuck in, but I don't know anything. But I'm a member of your family, so you've got to send me to chop the wood. You've got to send me to get the water. You've got to send me to, and I want to learn. And as soon as they got that, they're like, yeah, got you now. And so then they would start using me, and because then I would be a super attentive in the house for whatever it was that they wanted, then they loved it. And they absolutely loved it. They just loved the fact that I seemed to really enjoy their food, seemed to really enjoy being with them, was really interested. And they're like, oh, so many other people will maybe come through in cars and take pictures through the window, but you're in our house and you're interested. And
our way of life.
And you're not above us, you're one of us.
Yes.
And so they're like, oh, the crew, they're going to leave, aren't they? But you're going to stay.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't take much to realize that's what it was. That doesn't take much. You just got to give it to you all. You've got to throw yourself in fully. I'm not going to go and hang out with the crew. I'm going to hang out with you. That was hard. It was hard. But at times, because it was uncomfortable.
It makes you realise just how privileged we are here in the West. I mean, my God, we are so privileged and often on the back of other people's exploitation. And to have lived in the way that you have with people that have such basic diets, such basic resources in really hardcore landscapes must be, I can't even begin to imagine what an eye-opener that is for you. And then to come back into the Western world, like how do you make sense of that?
Yeah, well, it was relatively discombobulating, to say the least. I kind of was able to see it all in a sort of in a bigger picture and understand. Well, we're at where we're at, they're at where they're at, and I'm kind of floating in between, having these amazing experiences. And it did take its toll on my life in many ways. I went on a very strong trajectory of experience, which meant that I would come back and be almost a different person to the one I was before. It made being in relationship quite hard at times, because I was having very different new experiences to my partners over the years. And so that was one of the tolls on my life.
How do you communicate that? How do you come back and say, my God, I've just been drinking blood and I've just seen this.
Yeah, well, the
happening.
hardest things was so the tribe series was one thing, but then I went and did a series going down the Amazon, and that was just about globalization. So that series was like the one that really changed my life, because essentially we chose the Amazon, because so many people used to come up to me and go, is it good that you're visiting these tribes? Are you not having a negative effect on these people by just being there? And of course, the answer is that I am having an effect on these people by being there, and I had to acknowledge that. But the reason I was able to sleep at night was because I realized on all of these journeys I was going on into the middle of nowhere, meeting these people, they were all struggling, not because of film crews coming in, but because of the missionaries, the miners, the loggers, the local government. These were the forces that were affecting them. And of course, those forces, the heart of it, is our way of life in the rich nations. And so that was, so we decided to make a series basically looking at globalization, and we chose to do it still in the sort of, in the manner of the programs I was making, which was like adventure and living with tribal people. So we did this trip just going down the Amazon. So it was less about living with a group and more about a journey, but meeting people along the way.
And meeting the impact of globalization.
And so I would go and live with the community who were living in the cocaine region. I'd go and live with the community who were there working in the gold mine or the soil or the logging or the slavery or the ranchers or the meat farmers. So all of these different groups, I would go and make friends with them. But at the same time, we would then see what actually was happening there. And so for me, it became so clear straight away that, like, okay, so all the things in my life were I was
impacting on
yeah,
that
and I was,
action.
but I was then also meeting the people and making friends with the people and living with the people who were being negatively affected by essentially the way I and people in my nation live our lives. And so that became another step that became incredibly hard for me to come back and just carry on business as usual. You know, like my champagne lost its fizz, like everything suddenly I could see behind it, like ripped out the curtain of the machinery of the world, and it's like, okay, this is what this means, and that, and having no, and having, I'm being the only one in my social group with that experience, and not wanting to be the party pooper at every turn, but not being able to avoid it.
Not only seeing the writing on the wall, but experiencing firsthand.
And that's the big thing,
impact.
because it's actually so often we all know about these things, but it's the humanizing of it is when we're able to make the changes.
Well, this is it, isn't it? Relationship.
Yes.
The moment you have a relationship with someone and you're seeing the direct impact that you're having on them, you're seeing the suffering that's being caused. How can you carry on?
It's so true. Well, some people, you know, for a long, I mean, I have been for much of my life relatively numb in a sense, is that some people are already viscerally experiencing the pain of the world and the suffering and having that empathic understanding. When they watch the news, they're really feeling the pain of those people and can make those connections much more easily. Others, and I include myself in this, have to go on a much stronger journey before they're able to really feel that more deeply. And so for me, things like the ayahuasca journeys that I've been on and the meditation that I've learned has enabled me to feel more deeply. But up until then, I was able to quite easily compartmentalize. It's like, oh, okay, that's happening over there in Syria. That's nothing to do with me. And now I obviously see it as like, no, that's absolutely to do with me.
Because
well, it's not only because it's one, because that could just be a phrase that we just use that a lot of people go, well, what does that mean? But it's no, directly I can see now the petrol in the car and what we're doing over there and all the rest of it. These two things, it may be not today, but historically at least, and the way we live our life and the way we've manipulated that part of the world and all the rest of it, and here these big superpowers all fighting over this, that's me, my life is part of that. You know, and there's a phrase I used recently, I was writing an article and I didn't use it in the end, but it's coming to me this moment. It's like, you know, when I was in the Marines, for example, it's like, you know, you used to think that I was there defending life, but really I was defending a way of life. Yes. And that's what it is, you know, our lifestyle has a cost in the world. And that's what going down the Amazon showed me. It's what going around the Arctic showed me, because that, again, in the Arctic, that was more about climate change, but that showed, again, this interconnectivity, because you think of the Arctic as this sort of pristine, remote ecosystem on its own, but it's not. That, again, our way of life is impacting things there, but that's also going to come back to us. So it became clear with my career that not only was I impacting the world, but at some stage, those impacts are going to come back. And we see that in everything. It's not only, well, it's geopolitically as well as ecologically.
It's so rare. In this moment, I'm feeling deeply privileged to sit with someone that's had direct experience. Because I go by direct experience, my direct experience. I can only ever come from my direct experience. And to be sitting with someone that's had such a wealth of worldly experience, actual worldly experience. You know, you talk about the Arctic, you talk about the Amazon, you talk about Africa, you talk about Borneo, you talk about Papua New Guinea. You've been all over the world. All over the world. And your most recent work, Tawai, this beautiful, beautiful film, which charts your connection and empathy with one tribe that has touched your heart more than any other on this earth. Of all the people that you've met, the Penan. Share a little bit about that.
Wow. Well, you know, the Penan basically were the last group that I visited when I was making the TV series Tribe, and I wasn't even that excited about going to visit them because they were in Borneo. I'd been to Borneo so many times. I couldn't believe that there would be a nomadic hunter-gatherer group living in Borneo, but there were, and I met them, and meeting them from the first moment totally changed everything I thought I knew and believed about human nature and society. You know, I was the guy that had lived with all these tribes, thought I knew it all, seen it all, and then I met this one group and they made me reevaluate all of it. And the reason was because basically all the other groups that I've ever lived with were very similar to us in many ways, even though they're more connected and more with nature, and they have many wonderful aspects. But in one very real way, they were similar in that they all have hierarchy.
Yes.
They've all got leaders and shamans, like we've got chiefs and, so they're like, they got chiefs and shamans like we've got, leaders and religions. And so we're all similar in that way, but the Panan were the only group who had none. They were truly egalitarian. Wow. And the way that they were with each other, it was almost like they had eliminated competition from their way of being. At least eliminated it in the daily occurrences that was available to me. And then I started reading into it after meeting the Panan and realizing, oh my God, this, and then meeting anthropologists who knew all about this. And it's like, no, this is actually how we all were for 90% of our time on the planet. And no one was talking about that. It's just not out there in our sort of cultural narrative that that's what our real ancestry is.
So in a nutshell, what is an egalitarian society specifically? Like really break it down so that we can be...
So
the dictionary.
Sure. So basically the Panan, there's all of these groups who are living before agriculture and before settlement, they all have but 3 or 4 things in common. And they're only really left in Africa and Southeast Asia. Everywhere else, it's all been taken over by sort of the agricultural practices and the power and corruption that's come since then. But these groups that give us an insight into the past, they have no leaders, so no one is valued more or less than anyone else. So there's lots of differences, like the men and women have different roles and stuff, all chosen by themselves, but no one's valued more or less than each other. So they're all the same. There's a deep-seated equality. There's no ownership. So they just don't have the concept that this possession could be mine, because nature is providing this stuff for all of us, and so that's for us all to share. And some groups like the Panan, they're very much about sharing, and other groups, like I was with the Benjeli in Africa, and they're a form of what they call demand sharing. So it's like, well, if you're not using, I'll just take it. So there's different ways of doing it, but the same principle is like no ownership. And they're generally relatively pacifistic as well. So they have like a conflict adverse way of being. So they move away rather than into conflict. And what else? There's a few other things, but I was about to say something, I can't remember what it was. But you get the feel, you get the sense of it.
So even with elders, there's no
a kid, as soon as he can walk, is a member of the group.
How beautiful is that?
Yeah. And obviously everyone's allowed to say what they want to say, but there's no coercion. No one, even parents to children, there's no you must do this. It's just
because I say so, because I have more power
the kids
than you.
Just do as the kids go as they please. And like, of course there are lines and boundaries that people try not to make them cross too much. But ultimately there's no coercion. I mean,
So do they have any rules, any boundaries? Are there boundaries?
Well, I think that there is, the thing about groups like this is like they're obviously they are bound to each other and to nature. And so nature provides the boundaries in some ways. And the biggest sort of fear that they have is of being ostracized by the group. Okay. So that would be the thing that limits their behavior to a degree. Okay. So they are all listening out and watching out for each other. Yeah. But at the same time, they understand that if someone gets really upset or sad or angry, then they have to bring that person up. Likewise, if someone tries to get too ahead of themselves, they have tools to stop them getting there.
How
so like, for example, when I was with the Benjeli in Africa, because the Panan, it's very hard to see. It seems like so gentle. They're like kind of like, it's just a flowing space. Yeah. Whereas when I went to the Benjeli in Africa, there was much more evident. So like, for example, I was with the guys and they pointed at a dude over there and say, you see that guy over there? He's like, we all know he's probably one of the best hunters here. But a couple of years ago, he started showing off that he was the best hunter. So we stopped going hunting with him, and the women refused to cook his food because we just don't want that here. And so they all working all the time. If anyone starts hoarding too much, again, they stop. They will take it away.
So there's a cooperative.
Yes, but it's not centralized.
Consensual.
It's not centralized. That's the thing that we have. We have our rules and governance that is centralized.
And it's imposed.
But it's imposed, but that centralized is, as we know, centralizing power is where corruption comes. Yes. But when it's everyone gets the rules and everyone buys into it. But for me, the thing I've kind of learned, having talked about this now so much, is that it's the story. It's the knowing is the most important thing. They know because of their own cultural history and the stories that they've kept alive from the first moment that they became egalitarian, essentially when they overthrew the apex alpha males, back, I mean, like 200,000 years ago, whatever it is. That story is still alive for them. And so they now know, they have it in their cultural lexicon and their cultural sort of storytelling, that they work best when they're all equal. So they're all working at that the whole time. We don't have that story. No. We have a story whereby actually a rising boat raises all ships, and like we work really well when leaders take over, and all of our narratives are much more about strong leadership and centralized power and government. And somehow we've been hoodwinked out of that story. So that's...
our reference point is someone has to take the lead and show us the way, rather than
that story has been kind of somehow lost or erased. Yeah. And so we don't have that. So when I start saying, oh, we'll better, everyone's go, well, I'm not sure about that. Did you ever read, you know, like what Piggy did in the island or whatever? So like we have all these different debates about it. Whereas them, they all buy into it. No, they get it. And whether or not that's shown or proven, maybe they don't get to a place where it is shown or proven. They just hold on to the story. Yeah. Let's not let him get any ahead of himself. Let's not let that person hoard too much. Let's not let that person start showing off.
It's just the fact that there's the cooperation, that everybody comes together
because they all buy into it.
They buy into the story.
They all buy into the story.
And the result is...
amazing. But they're also the freest people I've ever met. You'd think that would be something that stops you, but it's not. They're actually all expressing themselves in this amazing way. It's like being with the Ben Jelly. It's like you feel like so stiff English person where they're all just flamboyant. And so they're fully able to be themselves. And like, for example, when I was with the men running around in Africa with these dudes, all like flexing muscle and being masculine and like showing off their muscles and all being like really... you know, kind of proud of them, proud of their me. Yes, but it's absolutely. Yes. So it was a group thing. And then I remember one time, I've told this story before, it's that someone threw a stick into the middle of us as a group of men. And so half of us got one side, half of us got the other side. And you're like, okay, cool, I know what happens here. We have a tug of war. This is what happens, yeah? No, we all flex muscles and stuff, and it goes up and down and in and out. But at no time did it become one versus another, one group versus another group. Everyone was happy for everyone else to be showing off in their own way, but like and sort of gruffing and panting and stuff. But never did I feel that energy of against each other. And it was just tiny little moments like that I was like, wow, they really have let go of something that I have so in sort of like carry to every moment, is this, okay, how am I going to be a little bit more? Like our whole wittiness and chippy language and all, it's like a little bit more than the other with my comments and quotes, as I say in the film. It's like, these are the elements of like competition that are so ingrained in us, and they just didn't seem to have them. And that's why, because I talk about in the film, there's this thing I couldn't put my finger on. What was it that was so different about the Pan Am? And I now look back at it and go, that's what it was. It was that they didn't have competition in their daily lives, that they're expressing themselves.
Flow.
With a whole sense of identity was a sort of unity identity with nature as well, and not about me being better or worse. And then of course the girls pick the guys for that reason rather than not because I'm the better hunter. It's like, no, I'll pick you because you're a nicer guy. So it's all of us together working in that same space.
So after having all of these extraordinary experiences, insights, recognitions, and I mean, when you're aware of the keys of what can unlock a whole new paradigm, really, for the Western world, where do you go with that? What are your next steps? Like, what are you going to do?
Well, you know what? I realised that at the moment, these are just experiences, and then turned into concepts and turned into ideas, and so I'm still very much up here.
Yeah.
And I realised that, you know, I just made this film, and even that was a frustrating process because I had all this to say, and actually I can say it much easier to you than I did even in the film. You know, the film was like, it took millions of pounds and like years of my life, and actually I only probably said like 10% of what I wanted to say. Yeah. So I'm like, how am I going to get all this out? Because if you start like some like rampaging diatribe, no one's listening. Yeah. You've got to find some way of inspiring, and then offering an alternative and offering these, this insight into a better way. Because for all of us, I think that that's a better way. Whether you're at the top of the perceived material ladder or at the bottom of it now, we're all going to be better off by these bits of wisdom that can come from the tribes. And I think all of us, because having also been successful in this world, having earned loads of money and having like loads of notoriety and stuff, I realised that these things that are the driving force for so many of us, they don't bring happiness either. And that's a great privilege to have got to a place to have had that realisation. Most of the rest of us are all trying to get there, thinking that's going to bring us happiness, and it just doesn't. So having had all of those privileges, I really feel very sure that the information that these wonderful people have shared with us is beneficial for us all to hear. So I desperately want to get that out still, but it's about how to package it. And for me, I think I've realised that I need to embody it. I've got to actually go and live it.
Ground it.
I've got to live it. I've got to live it. At the moment, it's all this conceptual stuff, and I believe it, but no matter how much I say that, I realise that for many, I see the eyes glazing over. So I've actually got to go and do it.
Yeah.
I've got to go and do it, and then go, right, guess what? I'm happier than I've ever been. This is working for me. Come join in, like start a revolution from the grassroots up, just like you're doing. You know, look at this amazing centre here, you know, the amount of people you inspire by what you're doing because you are living it. And that inspires me so much. And I want to join that, you know, in my own way, in my own place, but in a very similar sort of feel for our own place in this journey that we're all on. So I reckon that, and also, you know what it's like, when you are living it, the way you communicate is different because it's embodied. It's not constant. You're not locking horns with someone intellectually.
Exactly.
You don't need to worry about that. You don't have to. You don't get into that ego fight anymore. You're like,
it's here.
It's here. You know, it's in my in my very fingers.
Exactly.
And that's kind of scary. You know, you've been on a long old journey, but for me, I've got a pretty nice little life wrapped up, and I could continue that. So, you know, this is like time to step up to the mark now for me.
It's the time to step up to the mark for so many of us that are feeling the call, because so many of us in the world are so ripe and ready for a fresh new way of being. You know, we have leaders that we don't believe in. We're starting to come back to our own power. We're starting to come back to our own recognition that we are an intrinsic part of this earth. We can't live separately from life anymore. We only have one choice, and it's to come into unity and come into a place of real heart connection, real care with each other and cooperation with each other. Because war doesn't work, does it? It makes money, but it doesn't work for a peaceful world. So I'm looking forward to making a new world with you as a neighbour.
Yeah.
Well up for that. Come here,
Wow, wow. What a wonderful chat. Thank you, Hoppi. You're an amazing, super inspiring being.
Thank you so much, Bruce. I feel like I've made a real soul friend. I really do. You're an amazing human being. I feel very, very blessed and enriched by your life journey, truly. Thank you. Thank you. So much love. Wow.
Great. And also thank you for having me here, you know. It's been really lovely showing me around your place and having me in your home, looking after me the way you did. It's been really sweet.